Hello, I'd like to welcome everyone to our webinar today, Building Co-Conspirator Capacity. Today's webinar is sponsored by the GLCUHO Inclusion and Equity Committee. From Eastern Michigan University, my name is Tim Nichols, he, him pronouns, and I am the GLCUHO Technology Coordinator and your technological moderator for today's webinar. Before we begin the webinar, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items with you to maximize your learning experience for this session. To ask questions, if you have any, please type them in the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. The presenter will go ahead and answer those questions as quickly as possible, but we want to make sure, obviously, that we're dedicating enough time to cover all the material today. Should you experience any problems, please type in the chat box, and we will work to assist you. And then at the end of the session, the presentation and audio recording will be available on our website, glcuho.org, under the Webinar Archives resource for your future reference. We encourage you to share this resource with your colleagues who are potentially unable to attend. And at this time, I will now yield to our host and session moderator, Katie Zietz from Inclusion and Equity, to introduce our speaker and to get us started.
Thank you, Tim. We are here to give a warm welcome to Sarah Colome. She is the CEO and founder of Collective Futures and here to talk to us about co-conspiratorship and leveling up. Take it away, Sarah.
Thank you so much. And thank you to the committee for inviting me today. I'm so excited to be here, just share space and have what is such a critical conversation for truly anybody in our society, but particularly those who are working in higher education spaces, housing and residence life. So thank you for choosing to spend an hour. We have a small enough group that I really encourage you all to just hop in, leverage the chat, unmute yourselves. This should really be more of a facilitated conversation than a presentation. We are recording this, and so if there's something that you do want to contribute, but for any particular reason you would like it to be de-identified, please feel free to direct message me that in the chat, and I can raise that in the conversation without identifying you. As you heard, my name is Sarah Colome. I use she, her, ella pronouns. I am the Chief Executive Officer and founder of Collective Futures, LLC. Just a bit about me and why I'm the one who's here with you today. Across my career, I've spanned a number of different sectors: higher education, nonprofit at the local and national level. I've worked with governmental bodies. I've worked with companies and corporations. And throughout that time, I found that there is a particular challenge that translates all sectors and truly most leaders, and that is translating values into action, or operationalizing the beliefs and the values that we hold close to us and to the organizations that we're a part of, and making those a part of our everyday actions. In some cases, folks are really well-intentioned and just haven't had it modeled. And in other cases, folks choose to weaponize values. And so the company is about really partnering with people who are interested in doing that challenging but lasting and necessary work to do the translation so that we are living the values that we hold dear to us. That can be through consulting and coaching, training, conversation, and strategic planning, among other things that we offer. But today, what we're really going to be focusing on is this concept of moving from ally to co-conspirator. How do we level up? Now, before we talk about what we're going to be doing and digging in, I want to raise a couple of important caveats. The first one is a note on language. This is not a conversation about identifying the quote right word to be using. Language is shifting. It means different things to different people. What we are talking about is how we can be intentional about our language, its relationship to the power that we have access to, and how we leverage that power in alignment with our values. I also want to acknowledge that folks who are joining today or seeing this even after the live recording and the live event are joining from different places across our country. And there are so many challenges that we are all navigating right now, trying to, in some cases, literally keep our heads above water, as we know that folks who have been impacted by not one but multiple hurricanes at this point are simply trying to survive in Florida and other areas. multiple genocides occurring across the country as well, or across the globe, as well as a number of other targeted harms that both the people that we aim to serve and ourselves are navigating on a regular basis. So I know we're tired, and I also know that the invitation to have conversations like this varies from place to place. In some places, in some states, and at some institutions, some of the language we're going to be using isn't welcome or allowable. So I do encourage you to keep that in mind and to hold that so that we can flexibly enter in and out of this conversation, not policing each other's language or actions, but really inviting opportunity to think about where the creative ways that we can build our individual capacity as a way to support a larger collective that is committed to creating a world without violence and that is liberated, where everyone is safe, celebrated, and seen. So that's really the focus of today. And our ultimate goals are to differentiate between allyship and co-conspiratorship, explore positionality and power within higher education spaces, and facilitate some resource sharing to advance the solidarity that centers the needs of marginalized communities. And that's the lens that we're looking through, is an anti-oppressive lens that starts with the core needs of our most marginalized. Because when we're serving them, we are inherently also meeting the needs of those who have additional layers of power and privilege. So with that, I want to start with what I believe is a really powerful quote from activist and author Alicia Garza. And they tell us that the thing I don't like about the word ally is that it's so wrought with guilt and shame and grief that it prevents people from doing what they ought to do. And I find this quote really powerful because it outlines the individual and insular way that allyship often gets framed, and even if not framed, the way it gets actualized, the way that it shows up in our regular lives. So I want to ask you all, when I say this word of ally or allyship, I'm sure different reactions come up. Hop in the chat or please unmute yourself. I would love to hear, and please introduce yourself and where you're from if you feel comfortable doing so. But I would love to hear from y'all. What words or thoughts come up when you hear the term ally or allyship?
Hi everyone, my name is Katie. I use she, they pronouns. I think a lot of the times, especially for like younger generations, there can be towards like these trends. And so like the first thing that comes to mind with like ally is like the LGBTQ, like if that talk Valentina, like I'm an ally, like those types of things. So I think it's really interesting, and it's definitely something that we need to kind of talk about, like the level of engagement through allyship and like that types of stuff. So I think this is a really important conversation that we should be having.
Thank you, Katie. You touched on so many of the important things, and also for being the first one to hop in. I appreciate you. Others. There is not a wrong answer to your reaction to a word. I see. One person offered, it's not a question, but the thing that comes to mind is the concept of putting something on the line. Absolutely. That's a beautiful bridge between allyship and co-conspiratorship as well. Someone else, Michelle offered empathizing with others, offering support to others. Wonderful. Thank you. Yes, so ally has a lot of like mixed responses to that word. And again, this isn't about choosing the right one, but allyship is has become almost a checkbox in some cases, or a badge of honor that we place. So one of the ways I like to talk about this is if we imagine a race and we imagine a lot of people running a race, uh, allies could be considered the people who are cheering on the people who are running the race. Another example, as a white, Hispanic, able-bodied, cis woman who also holds invisible disabilities, Allyship might look like me running around and waving the most recent anti-racist book that I've read, but I seem to be missing in action when somebody says something problematic in a meeting. Or if you've ever been in a situation where somebody's speaking over a woman, or somebody's co-opting the ideas of a colleague of color, for example, allyship could look like the person who comes up after the meeting to the person who was targeted or the person who was slighted and saying, "Oh my gosh, that was so frustrating, right? Are you okay?" Often leaving the other person feeling as if, like, well, it would have been wonderful if you had said that that's problematic or frustrating in the moment. All of this drives towards this concept that, again, the term ally isn't the issue, but how we're framing and through what lens we think about what our solidarity looks like and what it's driven by. So if we're not careful, allyship can become more about perceptions and labels than action and co-conspiratorship or sacrifice. So, oh, do people know that I'm down? Do people know that I'm woke? I want to have my badges on so everybody knows that I've taken the trainings, and I want people to think well about me. So one of the questions I often encourage people to think about when we're thinking about ally versus co-conspiratorship is this about how people perceive you or about how you live your values? Another question is, where does your satisfaction come from when you're engaging with solidarity? Dr. Bettina Love, who is both an academic and author, offers up a definition in a really fun interview pretty recently, and says, when I think about an ally, they know everything. They can say it, they can talk it. But when it's time, they're not there. And if they're there, they're looking at you like, you gonna go? You gonna go? As opposed to taking that initiative and that action and having the forethought and investment to be informed about what type of action needs to be taken and where we can most appropriately fit into that action. How about the concept of co-conspiratorship? Does anyone have strong feelings or thoughts about that language? Another question is that a term that you were familiar with before joining today's event? Ah, I see. One person offered, it's not a question, but the thing that comes to mind is the concept of putting something on the line. Absolutely. That's a beautiful bridge between allyship and co-conspiratorship as well. Someone else, oh, Michelle offered empathizing with others, offering support to others. Wonderful. Thank you. Yes, so ally has a lot of like mixed responses to that word. And again, this isn't about choosing the right one, but allyship is has become almost a checkbox in some cases, or a badge of honor that. All right, so it sounds like this is the first time for some folks. Others are agreeing that there seems to be degrees of commitment that can show up when we think about an allyship approach versus a co-conspirator approach. Thank you. Thank you for contributing in that way. And I agree. It's really thinking about action and longitudinal or sustainable commitment. So another word that sometimes we hear, and again, this isn't about the right word, but when we think about co-conspiratorship, we can also think about accomplice, being an accomplice to something or to someone. So co-conspiratorship really calls us to move from language to action. And part of action is also being intentional about our language, of course, but not stopping at having a conversation or moving through the training. How are we integrating what we know and what we've learned and our commitment to learning into our regular life, both personally and professionally? It's about intentional practice. So a long-term commitment. It's not one time of doing something, but being committed for the long haul and redirecting our energy away from what is it that people think about me to how am I showing up according to what I believe? How am I showing up according to what it is that I'm hearing that our most marginalized students, staff, and faculty, as well as community members, need to be safe, happy, and healthy? One of the critical things here in terms of co-conspiratorship is about risk. So again, Dr. Bettina Love tells us that co-conspiratorship for them is about taking risks for someone, to put something on the line, but to use it in some way in which you're using your privilege. And acknowledging that power and privilege is one of the first places that we have to start. Katie just hopped in and said this reminds them a lot of mutual aid versus volunteer and support. I love that distinction. Thinking about how we're integrating into and as part of a very large community that targets the specified needs that people have, and recognizing that we each have different access, position, and power to be able to be a part of a larger approach to community care. So co-conspiratorship is, when we really want to whittle it down, about being in it together and really being in it. That means showing up. And one of the beautiful things about co-conspiratorship is that it promotes accountability, because we can't have co-conspiratorship without relationship. And in that, that's both relationship to others as well as the world that we're a part of, plus the relationship that we have to ourselves. So part of co-conspiratorship, and this is a larger conversation, but I want to make sure that it's something that we're thinking about when we have our conversations, is that co-conspiratorship is about doing the personal work to distinguish between what feels uncomfortable versus what feels unsafe. Particularly with people with multiple layers of privilege, it gets very easy to start conflating when I don't feel comfortable with something as not feeling safe to take part of something. When in actuality, for many others who are around me who may not hold those same levels of power and privilege, for them, not engaging actually determines their safety. They have to be a part of these conversations, these movements, and these actions in order to survive. So the co-conspiratorship really has a call for self-learning, self-awareness, and accountability to make sure that we're, again, not centering ourselves. And when we think about power and position, I want to dig into that a little bit, because we have conversations about power and privilege all the time, but are we doing that self-assessment beyond the introductory learning, which is critical, but how are we applying that learning to ourselves? We know that everybody has the capacity to be a co-conspirator. It's whether we want to do that or not and do the work. And it's not just about positional power, although when we have positional power, we do have even more responsibility to acknowledge, hold, and activate it. But there's also identity-based power. And then, hello, intersectionality, and thank you, Dr. Crenshaw. How are those weaving together? So for example, at one point in my life, I was the director of a survivor center at a large public institution. We also did prevention and gender equity work. I worked with a swath of brilliant colleagues, and technically, we all had the same title. But when we walked into the rooms, we were read differently. The people who identified as fat Black women, queer or straight, who walked into those spaces, experienced those spaces differently than I did. We were able to leverage conversations or even have certain reactions without being penalized in the same way or interpreted the same way or referred to later in the same way. And so power, position, and identity are all intricately woven when we think about this. So that means we also have to get comfortable with acknowledging and exploring how our identities impact us, as well as how they show up in the world around us. So the questions that I like to raise when we think about position and powers, so that we can start to find the entry points that make sense for us individually, are: what access do I have? And access can be to resources as well as to people. So when we think about people in positional power and decision makers, we can also think about students, alumni, donors, other colleagues on campus, community organizations, and community change makers, people that are trusted, whether that's officially trusted or the auntie in the neighborhood that the students go to because that feels most like home, because perhaps campus doesn't. We also have to think about, where do I hold influence? It can be easy, and oftentimes we're disempowered to think that we don't have potential and possibility in our roles if we don't have director, vice chancellor, president, or so on in our title. We each have that scope of influence. So perhaps it's on the floor with the residents that you have. Perhaps it's with the team who's making sure that everybody in the building is fed. Perhaps it is at the executive level, and there is quick and easy reach, not only to high-level decision makers at your institution, but at other institutions in the region or across the country. We all hold influence. It's about recognizing it and activating it. And then finally, what are the resources that are available to me? It could be financial, it can be space, it can be relationship. It can also just be the willingness to hold space for people. Do you have time as a resource? Do you have empathy as a resource, which hopefully we can all tap into? Thinking about these help you to situate yourself to find preliminary entry points if you have been struggling with finding out where co-conspiratorship might show up in your life. So I want to pause here and see if there are any questions. Okay, I see one. Question, is there a line too far? Any thoughts on what that would be? That is a big question. If the person who offered that wants to add some other context, because I want to make sure I'm speaking to it, I can at least at a large level say, this is where in like the individual assessment really comes from, because what is safe or comfortable to me is going to be safe or comfortable to others as well. So thinking about the response, if I'm a caretaker, what does that look like? What am I able to sacrifice and risk? Because that truly is that shift. Am I willing to risk something? And not in a patronizing way. Oh, I'm risking my reputation by saying this. And because that is a real risk, but also thinking about how risk is about community empowerment and how that directly impacts us, even if the risk doesn't clearly identify us as the beneficiary. So for instance, if I am going to say something or lift up or point out some sort of oppressive action that's happening. Let's say there's a disconnect or there's inequity in funding across student affairs. So maybe you're in a state that has like a multicultural office, or maybe even lucky enough to have cultural centers on your campuses, and you know that there's inequitable funding across the division. Pointing that out and saying that this is something that we need to address is important, and that can benefit those communities and those spaces, but it's not just for them. Because in reality, when I am advocating for those who are most marginalized, those who maybe don't have the voice or the space in the conversation, or who are going to be penalized for being self-serving, when I'm using my voice, my position, and my power to advocate for them, I'm inherently improving access for all of my students. Because I think in higher education, we often get stuck in these are my students, those are your students. But in actuality, our responsibility is to students across the institution. And so whether the students who go into a Latin cultural center, for example, or a multicultural office frequently come into my space or not, when those spaces have what they need to support those students, I am inherently better able to serve those students as well. Their increased capacity supports our cross-learning, our cross-support, overall well-being and belonging on campus, which only further benefits everyone else who's impacted by those folks. We have a stake in this too, is really what the underlying score is. Somebody says, risk is exactly what I was hoping to get your thoughts on. Any tools or tips for considering risk as you enter into a situation with your allyship? Yeah, I think there's a lot of good tips, and I would encourage other folks to hop in here as well as we kind of move into this discussion space. I do have a couple of questions for y'all to think about, but when we think about risk, I would absolutely encourage you to be thinking about what it is that holds you back. And oftentimes fear is one of those things. Some of that can be constructed fear, and some of that is very real fear rooted in survival. And by constructed versus real-time fear, what I mean is fear that is tied to systems of oppression, or losing our positional power in a way that really only is about us. So more specifically, fear of being unliked. If I worry about interrupting in the middle of a problematic presentation, or to let's even say raise a question about the impact of a new policy on a particular population or office on our campus, I might not be very liked, especially depending on when in the presentation or when in the meeting I raise that, or how often I raise it and how persistently I raise that. That I might not be liked. And yeah, there's that risk. The risk on the other end, though, might be about the risk of access to critical services that students need, sometimes that determine their actual lived safety. And so thinking about like what is truly at risk, and giving yourself also the permission to know that as our lives evolve and as our situations evolve, that's going to look different. Another example, the way that I'm going to intervene physically in a situation, or the level of intensity in which I'm going to address, let's say, harassment from law enforcement, is going to look different if I am there by myself or if there are folks of color who are with me. Because I'm not going to be the recipient of any harm if harm occurs in that situation. So I think it's also about that broad view, and also recognizing that intense amounts of risk, so putting yourself out there because it's risky, as opposed to putting yourself out there because you know it's right and because you know it's what moves a cause further, actually is about making it about ourselves. So if it's, oh, well, I know that there's a protest happening, so I'm going to make sure to be at the front line and make sure to start something because it's inherently going to happen, and that way I'm the one who experiences harm, that is making it about ourselves. That is centering ourselves in that space. An alternate could be, I know that there are campus protests that are happening. We're concerned about safety, and so I'm going to be there to be a witness to what's happening. Should something happen, I will consider in that moment, and maybe even proactively thinking about where am I able to step in verbally, physically, or otherwise. One of the great ways to prepare yourself is to learn de-escalation tactics. And I'm not advocating that we need to be engaging in physical violence. What I am saying is that it's important to think about even just how your presence can impact a situation, how other people's presence might change the dynamics of that situation, and to really wrestle with what is uncomfortable versus what is unsafe. Because the colleagues who were there with me were colleagues of color. And so depending on who even engaged could have changed that situation. And I don't make the decisions for my colleagues in those moments, but that's where that relationship piece also comes in. To be in relationship with people already, so I'm not making decisions for them, but I'm also not placing this emotional labor burden on them by constantly being like, I know that's problematic. Do you want me to say it? Do you want to say it? Are you sure you're okay with me saying it? I don't want to take up too much space. And now we've again made it about ourselves. It can feel like that's a really tenuous place to be. What I offer you is that it's a spectrum, just like all other relationships. It's not about finding the perfect place and the perfect entry point, because that does not exist. We are constantly shifting and changing. Also, perfection, not a real thing, because there's no one right way to be or right way to act. It's about trying, assessing, shifting, and trying again. And doing that in relationships so that we're accountable, but also so that we have the support for our own growth and well-being. So I hope that answers that question. If not, you have something even more specific, please go ahead and throw it in. one of the big questions that often comes up is like, well, but does that mean I'm supposed to risk my job? I can't answer that for you because risking job looks different to different people. Asset, financial support, familial or community support looks different for people. I think it's a conversation that you need to have with yourself about what am I comfortable risking? What am I uncomfortable risking? And what is truly not safe for me to do in this moment? Because that might shift a week, a day, or even an hour later. But staying in touch with yourself is where you can feel best about making those decisions. And again, where relationship can also be a support, because there are going to be times where maybe we think it is about safety. And in retrospect, we say, I could have said something, or I could have pushed for this, or I really probably should have shown up there. And when we're in relationship with people, they can encourage us and support us in a way where we move through accountability and don't get stuck in the guilt or shame that Dr. Bettina Love was talking about earlier. Because then again, we're making it about ourselves. We're not asking for perfection, we're asking for practice. So I want to make sure that I share a couple of resources with you. There could be pages and pages and pages of resources, but a few places that I would encourage you to start. And if you've been learning, hopefully this just adds to your library. A couple of readings. So Equity in the Center is a fantastic organization. They have a blog, they have a podcast. Lily Zhang is a phenomenal researcher and author around deconstructing this concept of DEI, which often gets homogenized in so many different ways to help us do that independent individual growth, as well as making sure that we're translating what we're reading on a page into our personalized practice. Adrienne Marie Brown, honestly, I would recommend you read anything by them, but two important books are We Will Not Cancel Us. So exploring not just cancel culture, but also like what does loving accountability look like? And then similarly, a forthcoming book of theirs is Loving Corrections, which similarly looks at transformative justice in relationships. I would also recommend for white folks who are on this call, or if you have colleagues who ask for resources, Start by Talking has a podcast called Come Get Your White People. It is exactly as wonderful as it sounds, and includes pop culture and practical applications all through the lens of a Southern Black woman who has done anti-violence work for decades. And then there's a couple of Instagram accounts, because if we're going to be scrolling, we might as well be consuming things that help us live true to our values. These are a couple of the accounts that I would offer. If you have any that you find particularly helpful, please drop them in the chat or the Q&A, because what we're going to be doing is building out a short reflection activity for folks who aren't joining us today, but who will be watching this recording later on to be able to do some of their own processing and reflecting from what we've talked about today. So I would love to include those additional resources that you found helpful, if you can go ahead and share those with me as well. All of that to say is thank you so much for dedicating an hour of your time to this conversation. It's truly critical, because if we want to see that change, we have to be the ones to do it. My Collective Futures is truly about relationships, so I would love to stay connected with each of you. Please reach out with questions, to have conversations. If you feel like a conversation like this, particularly when this expanded, where we can be even more interactive, would be helpful for your institution, please let me know. But most of all, just know that you're not alone in this. You are not alone in recognizing that our world can and should look different than it does, that it's hard to be a part of that, but that it's necessary. So please be gentle with yourselves. Let me know how I can be a support, and have a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. We really appreciate you coming on and sharing your wisdom with us. I also want to plug for the GLCUO conference that's coming up. Registration is still open, so be sure to register, and we hope to see you there.
Perfect. Thank you all. Have a great day.